Now we have an option now to ask you to answer some of those questions, but I think first I'll just open up to the floor and see if there are specific questions from the floor.
Can I ask
Yeah. No, you please.
Tom a question?
Mark, please go ahead.
Well, I liked your little example of folks. Imagine that we're the folks in northern Iraq sitting and saying, damn, 149, you know, we got some goals, we're going to try to move up 10 steps a year or whatever it is. So one of the kinds of things I was trying to say by focusing on process is, well, what do we do? So we release prisoners, then we get a lower score on that. We get rich.
I think they tried that already.
Yeah, no, the correlates don't necessarily tell us much about mechanisms. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, but it means that that's a missing piece in what we have. If we want a plan to say, damn, you know, we're going to do better. So it's a challenge. I'm not, to make it useful, you have to know
what the next step is.
Yeah, and the writing, the articles and the methodology things talk about drivers, but I didn't really understand how those drivers work, because I don't think they're drivers in the direct sense.
I mean, to answer, you know, or to respond in some sense, I think that a lot of the things that are, as I read the index, a lot of the drivers that they're referred to, a lot of them are economic. You know, there is sort of an underlying assumption here that's, you know, not so thinly veiled that there, you know, more economic development, better business environments is something that's going to lead to peace. Now we can debate that.
Or follows from peace.
Or follow from peace.
Europe had peace after the war.
Right.
It's not clear that the peace wasn't the driver of the development rather than development growth.
Absolutely. I mean, the thing I would just say from it is, fair enough again, and as long as now the question gets asked, and people can now sort of focus themselves in a policy sense, you know, young leaders in any society can say, okay, now we see where we might be here. We might see that we may have some difficulties, and rather than just saying, yeah, peace is, well, yeah, peace is, you know, and then you get to this image of doves or something. You know, they can actually look at it and say, well, we may agree or disagree, but, you know, is this about the fact that we're spending X% of our budget on heavy armaments or arms transfers, rather than thinking about how much is spent on education, health, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. One last sentence.
Yes.
My wife was an administrator, as you know, in education. And she always said, I'd stare at this huge budget, over $1 billion, and then I had to say, what are the alterable variables? Where do I have some leverage that might make a difference? And I think that's a strategic kind of thinking that could follow from this in ways. Some things we do have control over, and some are, you know, kind of set.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. And Jake, did you want to make a comment now?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to respond quickly before, you know, we'll get to questions, and everything we want to talk about will build up quickly. So just a couple things on what you mentioned, you know, before, and then what's been mentioned right now. A few things, to, you know, again, to defend the index a little bit. As Zoe mentioned, there is no perfect index. There's also no comprehensive index, because you can't measure everything. So, you know, we do have to bear that in mind. When you're talking about these sort of next steps, drivers, again, this gets into this diagnostic prescriptive issue, and you know, you have to keep that in mind as you're thinking about how you want to use any of these tools. This comes back to what you mentioned before, incentivizing, which can, you know, that can happen for any number of the variables included. The one you mentioned was human rights, and that's something that certainly Freedom House has a lot of experience with thinking about. One thing to, you know...
And have you been effective in that, Jake? What do you think?
I think in some cases yes, and in some cases no. You know, you have to differentiate on various levels between, you know, what countries you're and what audiences you're dealing with when you're thinking about these things. You know, one very interesting tool to incentivize human rights and governance more generally in recent years has been the Millennium Challenge account. You know, it quite explicitly puts countries in competition with each other for what are very large outlays of aid. We're talking about whatever programs worth $250, $300 million and up. And what the MCC does is it takes data from institutions like Freedom House, some of these straight quantifiable proxy indicators like literacy rates and education rates, and it measures countries against their peers in different income groups. And that has been, for sure, the biggest driver of developing country governments to consult with Freedom House and talk about what they're doing, what they need to do to improve the scores. So that's been good. On the other hand, to be cynical about it for a moment, they come to us not really wanting to know what to do to improve their scores. They know what they need to do. And this comes into play a lot of the time. Most governments know what they need to do to get better, in terms of their international image and on behalf of their people. It's all about, so they want to convince us that they're doing those things. And then we have to be independent and try to evaluate whether that's true. Go ahead.
And now you're on the spot. Maybe then the question from Nick, how do we measure political will?
Well, I mean, that's one, political will is very hard to measure. That's one other thing I was going to mention, though, is that all these things that people mention as being critical context, I would put political will in a sort of critical context thing. History I would also put there. The method we've chosen to help differentiate contexts is to have narratives that accompany the scores. It takes a lot of work and it takes a lot more resources, but it's something the GPA might want to think about. You look at this list, Colombia and North Korea are next to each other. They have similar scores. You can dig into the data to think about why those scores are different. Countries basically achieve similar scores for very different reasons. And you can dig into the data, but it's very helpful to have these narratives that lay out, whether briefly or more at length, why, the background and the causes that go into this. Political will tends to emerge quickly within these narratives.
Great. Melanie, would you want to comment on the use of regional organizations?
If I may, I would like to comment on the private sector and the environment. Sorry. No, I think that's and that's something very positive. What I thought, I think from what the group identified and from what you identified while presenting the index is, and it comes back to how can you create incentives for peace? And I think one very big issue and what we are working a lot on is sort of creation of livelihoods and livelihoods opportunities. And in the context of peace dividends. And the most powerful is, that people can take a shovel instead of an arm. And I think, and we see in all these countries, that's in Sudan, we see it in Latin America, we see it that, high unemployment, especially of a very young group of the population or ex-combatants, is a big security risk. And I think there is a lot of work that can be done. I think it's very positive with the Global Compact to this collaboration, but also on the practical side. I mean, we are looking at the moment into these things as well. How can we better, when you see at the transition from sort of end of conflict into a more longer term development, you have how can you create, how can economic growth, how can that go down to the population and to the people? And I think one very, very, very critical point is that people have jobs, because, and can earn their own money and are not, do not have to rely on assistance, external assistance, and all of that, and have the means to rebuild their own societies and states. I think that is very, very, and I think that could be much stronger, I think, in terms of partnerships and to build on that and on that kind of work.
And may I just jump in then? Is the UN the right forum to push that forward? Is it something that your department is working on, or do you see some other organizations which should be pushing that?
I think the UN definitely, there is, I think from our side, from UNDP, we're trying to do more on that. And I think definitely there are some initiatives, but I don't see it yet as big as it could be. And so I think I think the sort of social corporate responsibility side, I think on the policy level, what you're already doing, but then there's also a practical side. And the practical side is, for example, to just, we have a meeting in a couple of weeks with a group of private sector, so sort of from the social corporate group in the US, of including multinationals that are interested to get involved and that are interested to do that. And I think another point of that is not only on that side, but also in the country is access to credit and access to money and microcredit schemes. I think is also very, very important, and that is more from the not so much on the social corporate side, but
may I just push you a little bit further on that,
Yeah.
and if any of the other panelists want to respond, then I'm thinking most companies, they have good political risk analysts associated. They use perhaps some of the same indicators, or they have country analysts who look at this, and they make sort of a very maybe relatively easy calculation. Say, is it worth the risk? Is it worth our money to go into this situation? Do we need to sit and discuss, or what can be done from academics and public institutions?
I think, yeah, it's a very good question, but I think there are two parts to it. I mean, the first part is, there's an economic theory that says, you calculate your risk and you go in and you take a higher risk, but then you speculate for higher profits. And once you have peace and you have a peace dividend, you are the one who's sort of similar to a monopoly well placed in the market. If it would be as easy as that, as you have suggested, I think there would not be a lot of multinational companies in a lot of these countries. I mean, look at Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola is everywhere. It's in the smallest part of Nicaragua where I've worked, to the Congo, where you have the biggest conflict. They are everywhere. Sorry. So I think it's a question worth asking. And yeah, and then there's another aspect of this, really, that firms are thinking. I've seen, for example, and which is not a zero-sum game, but I've seen in Katanga and Congo around mining companies through these social corporate schemes. One of the mining schemes investing in an NGO that sort of there are a lot of illegal miners, artisanal miners, that break in at night into the mining companies and steal. So obviously they don't like that, because that makes them lose profit. So they invested with an organization in a scheme that has from stones produced sand, and that is used in the mining company, and that creates jobs. And that is not, I mean, it's not that they're not doing that for selfless reasons, but I think there are opportunities, and I think we can do better on different levels to exploit more of these initiatives. And it's not, and I think one needs to be very clear that this is not something, why is there not something that everyone can benefit a little bit? I mean, we also know that mining companies don't build roads that don't lead to mines, but roads are something that is not bad. So I think it's a little bit of a gray zone and not so easy and straightforward.
Thank you.